want to do is come here and hear myself. I'm not here to tell you about myself. I have a story that's, I think, worthy of sharing, but the story is not about me. With that said, I did bring my lovely bride. My lovely bride is an answer to prayer. And I won't go into the details because we don't have enough time. But both of us were so broken back in 1979. We had been so 78. Dating, and both came to the same conclusion at the same day, almost, that we were never going to date again until we led to the right one, and only by the act of God, with nobody else was involved. We met, and we knew immediately that we were called to be married, and if you ask her, she'll tell you. Today, I still have never asked her to marry me. We just both knew. And that's the way God does things. That's why my story unfolds. It's God that involved in my life. And he's blessed us ever since with 2 children. Our daughter Paige is here, and she's been like my bride's mother and caretaker throughout the transplant process. She's been an angel. That said, Sherry and I, by the way, the phone's a $50 fine. The offering basket will be passed right at the end. Sherry and I pray together every day, and we start every day through prayer, and that's very important to us. We close every day together in prayer, and our lives have been richly blessed because we pray together. If you're not praying together as a couple, you're missing out. How deep your love for one another and your strength in the Lord grows because we take the time to pray. Without prayer, the vitality of your marriage is sacrificed to a degree. We ask the Lord every day that he would use us to honor his name, and that he would use us to help and bless and encourage and bring joy to others. So our focus is always on him. As I go through the transplant story, it remains the same. Lord, even though we're going through a transplantation process, we're here to honor your name. How may we do so today? And we ask him to provide opportunities. How many of you pray for opportunities? You go about your daily routines, but do you stop to pray that, Lord, you would give me opportunities to help others, to bless others, to encourage them, to bring joy to them? Everyone should have that outward focus. We're all called to share the gospel, but it's not more. It's more than just sharing God's word. It's words or actions of service, and we would encourage you to think likewise. We love opportunities, and they just seemingly arise somehow. But that said, I'm not sure how much time I have. I'm still in the first paragraph. And I have, what, 3 hours you said? With that said, I was given an amazing gift, a newness of life, as some would say, because I had a heart transplant. But before I begin, just a little bit of background. As I've already shared, my story begins and ends with the Lord, not just through our prayer, but throughout the entire process, we just felt God's firm, guiding hand. I actually heard his voice, not audibly, but my sheep hear my voice, John 10, and we know that he speaks actively to those that are listening. But in order to listen, you have to pay attention. And I was all about hearing. And so I sought him daily, and I knew from what he had done with me throughout my life that I could trust him, whatever happened and wherever that led me. I pray you too, when you go through your worst struggles, that you too can trust in the Lord all the more every day. And as you do so, even through your worst of times, you see his hand to give you the strength to get through. Now, Jesus commands us not to worry. Everybody knows that. It's in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6. He says, I tell you, do not worry about your life, which you will eat or drink, or about your body, which you will wear. Can any of you add a single hour to your life by worrying? I had a great example of my father. He was an Episcopal priest, so I'm a preacher's kid. Some don't like that, but it is what it is. And I was always very proud of him. And one thing that he always showed me, once he went into the ministry, because they didn't pay very well, was that he could never again worry about money. But the reality is he didn't worry about much. And so I learned from a great teacher. My earnest desire every day is to show myself loyal to my Lord. It says in 2 Chronicles 16:9, For the Lord searches to and fro throughout the whole earth, seeking to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. I want to be loyal to him, so much so that when people look at me, they know this person loves Christ. And he's loyal to him in terms of his words, actions, and deeds. I know his power was made strong in my weakness. I spent 4 months in the hospital or around the hospital, and so I was basically flat on my back most of that time. At my weakest hour, my weakest days, he was clearly the strongest and the most evident, the most visible in my life. I miss that. I don't miss being sick, but I miss the closeness that I had with him. I'm still close, but there's a difference. When you're really at your end, where you have no option but to lie there and listen, and to allow the Lord to work in your heart if your heart's open, you will see his strength is magnified in your weakness. And I found great hope in that. And from day one, Sherry and I prayed that we would receive our heart in the perfect time from the perfect donor. The perfect heart from the perfect God at the perfect time from the perfect donor. And that's how it played out. And the word perfect could not be more aptly applied. So with that said, what happened? My mom threw rocks at the stork back in April of 1950, so I could have died then. I should have died by Mosaic law, and when I was age 13, I had the worst day of my life, according to Mother. And my mom came up to me after I had called her every name in the book, and it was just a bad day. And surely God was not pleased with me, and neither was my mother. And my day was so bad when my father came home and my mother told my dad what I had done. He trounced up every stair of the wooden staircase. I heard it, and I knew I was not long for this life. And I had barred my door with my bed and went out on the slate roof. The slate roofs last 40 years before they start to crack, and this was the 40th year and they were cracking. I was not allowed on the slate roof. So I went out there because that was my only safe place. And I knew if my father came out on the roof, I could jump and outrun him. With that said, my father knew better than I did. And he pushed through the barricaded door and peered out the window and looked at me and says, "Okay, no TV for 2 weeks." I mean, I expected to be spanked and disciplined, grounded, months, years, I didn't know. I just knew that I was a poor reflection of everything my parents taught me. The problem with being banished from TV is that was Patty Duke week, premiere week, and Patty Duke loved me and I loved Patty Duke. And that hurt me more than a spanking. It just showed me the Father's wisdom, and my father was wiser than I could have ever imagined. So I thank him for his discipline at that time. It taught me a great lesson. But interestingly, that night, forgetting that my bed had been pushed out from the wall, and my room was dark, and I just turned around and leapt into my bed in this spit of fury, forgetting the bed was out, and I hit my face flush against the headboard. And I split my face wide open, and I was bleeding profusely. And my mom came up the stairs, looked at me bleeding, and she said, "Why should I help you?" And I had no answer. And then out of the kindness of her heart, she did. And I'll never forget that moment. And it brings tears to my life to think that my mom loved me so much that she forgave me for my most wretched actions. I never had a day since then, and I was always a great child from that moment on. That said, Father knows best. Not just in terms of our physical life with our physical father, but my Father, my God, knows best. And he knows what's best for me. As I trusted in my Father through all the years that I was raised, I learned over time to trust more and more in my God. I have an insurance agency. It's a gift from God. We have no clients where you've asked for their business. All we do is pray. People show up. That way we can never take any credit for what we do. It's just a gift from my God. Every client is a gift, and we look at it that way. And if people come, that's great. We'll service the heck out of them. If they don't come, that's fine. We're not worried because who provides for us? My Lord provides. And there is no other insurance agency or other sales business that I know of that just prays. It works so well that our next door neighbor, who's a CFP and an accountant, he said, this year I'm going to try the Richard Hawkins method and just pray. And at the end of the year, he said, you know, I had my best year ever because I put my God first and I allowed him to bring the right people. That works in life, in every aspect. So, to my heart, what happened? On March 3rd, 2012, I was at a nearby fitness center and I was riding a recumbent bike. And I felt a faint come in on it. If anybody's ever fainted, how long does it take you to faint? Seconds, if that. It's usually momentary and you're out. I had a faint that came on and it lasted at least 10 seconds. I could feel it coming, and so I knew enough to stabilize myself on the recumbent bike. And so I put my feet on the floor, my arms on the handlebars, and laid my head on my arms. And therefore, because I was stable, nobody saw me. Until several minutes later, somebody behind me on the treadmill, a lady came up and tried to see if I was responsive. I wasn't. So then she walked to the other end of the gym and brought her husband over, and he checked to see if I was responsive, and I wasn't. So then they got a person from the fitness center, and he came over and said, no, he's not responsive, we better call 911. And they had defibrillators on the wall, but they didn't know how to use them. So they called 911, and the Riverside Fire Department arrived, I asked, 5 minutes later. So I was gone for somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes, actually more than 5 minutes, but somewhere 8 to 10 minutes. I don't know how much I was truly gone, but I was gone. How do I know? We were taken by ambulance, I was, with a team of lovely personnel to Riverside Community. When I got to Riverside Community, I had asked, as I had asked many times, please may I call my bride? And he says, no, you can't call your bride until you're stable. I asked repeatedly, 6 times at least, please let me call my bride. And he said, no. Sherry had always had this apprehension about me going to the gym. She always felt from the day I signed up that something was going to happen at first, and something did. So I called her up from the hospital, and she said, hi, and I said, hi, and she said, where are you? She says, I'm at the hospital. She says, well, how did you get there? I says, well, by ambulance. Well, how are you doing? I says, I'm fine. Nobody goes to the hospital by ambulance and is fine. I says, no, I am. I really am. And so she came down and sat with me and gave me the lecture. I did not have sex with that woman's finger, and just very pointed, and gave me a lecture. And very stern, but when she was done, we started yakking it up and just having, well, you can't have fun in the ER, but I was enjoying myself. And about 30 minutes later or so, the same ambulance team that dropped me off dropped in a patient across the hall. If you know Riverside's ER, then they're all glass rooms. And so the female EMT that was on the team that brought me came and stood in the threshold of our door, just standing agape, wondering, why am I having fun banjoing with my bride? And so I saw her and I invited her in. I said, thanks so much for your help this morning. I had no idea what she had done. But I appreciate your help. And she looked at me very sternly and said, you have no idea what happened to you, do you? I says, no, I really don't. She said, you were gone. And that was very pointed. I didn't get it. Nobody loses roughly 10 minutes without understanding that they've lost 10 minutes. You just don't awaken and have lost this time. You have to understand that when I was taken off the bike by the fire department at the fitness center, I was laid flat about 10 feet from the bike, and there were about 8 uniformed people around me, not knowing what's going on until they defibrillated me. As soon as I was shocked, I started to sit up and said, thanks so much, I'm going home now. And the guy with the paddle said, "You're not going anywhere, bud," and he pushed me right back down. I figured the odds were more in his favor. So that's why I agreed to go by ambulance to the ER. And it turned out quite well, but the fact is I really had no idea why I was there. Because again, you don't lose time. Several days later, after several procedures, I had 2 cardiologists come in to me and tell me, you don't get it. You're not paying attention. What is it I don't get? You're gone. A couple weeks later, I asked another one of the cardiologists and said, "You were dead." Was I dead? Apparently. I don't recall. I do recall an experience when they say I was dead. And that experience, very briefly, after I fainted, I saw this incredibly great white light. And I felt this immensely freeing, graceful feeling. It's as though I had transitioned somewhere. I can't identify it in words. But it was so unique and so special. And I felt there were no burdens. That was most noticeable. There was no weight from the problems of the world. Before I knew it, I was defibrillated and back in the scheme of life. But I'll never forget that. And that moment played a part in the future decision I made. 4 days later, they put me in the cath lab for a 4th or 3rd test that I had after my admission at Riverside Community. And they lost me there too. This time it was a matter of record. And after the procedure, they came out and told Sherry and Paige, well, we lost him, but it's okay, we brought him back. So as a matter of record, that's twice that I either have or have not passed. I accept the fact that as a matter of record, I have. I didn't feel any better after the procedures I went through. I had a stent put in because there was a partial blockage in one artery, but that wasn't a big deal. And after a number of months, I had been asked to go for a biopsy because my cardiologist in Riverside felt that my problem was not of myself, whether it was from something invasive. And so they compelled me over time to go get a biopsy. Before I got the biopsy, I went to a checkup 6 months, 5 months later after our episode in March, and I asked the doctor, why am I not feeling better? He said, you should have felt better immediately, but I didn't. And so that encouraged me to go get the biopsy, and I went to Cedars-Sinai, which is the most incredible facility I've never seen any place like it. If you are smart, you belong there. If you're a class valedictorian, that's where you'll go. It's the most competitive hospital I've ever been. This isn't an advertisement about Cedars, but they are so technologically advanced, and they're so upper echelon. If I had the choice, I'd go there for everything. The only problem is from Riverside, it's a 4-day trip. There's more cars on the road that impede your access, but that said, it's worth the drive. So after having the transplant, after having the biopsy, it was determined that I have a rare disease called amyloidosis, amyloidosis. Never heard of it, and as I was told by a number of doctors, amyloidosis, you only hear about that as a question on your medical boards. You never see anybody with it. But I had it. And interestingly, at Cedars, the person who treats more people with that disease than anybody else in the world practices out of Cedars. Interestingly, amyloidosis at Cedars is a common word. Any other hospital, it's not. That said, we knew from the biopsy that we had to have a transplant. We were told by one doctor to go to every hospital we could that does transplantation. Another doctor says, no, only go to Cedars. So we decided to take the advice of the first doctor who said, get your name listed everywhere. We didn't know that once you're on the list, you're on a universal list that is nationwide. So we went down to Sharp in San Diego County because they do more heart transplants in San Diego County than anybody else. But they only do 10 to 12 a year. Cedars did 119 last year, and they'll do many more this year. But while we were there, we met with a great transplant cardiology team, and we had a 2-hour interview, and they liked us, and we liked them. So we figured that was another opportunity. Maybe we'd get the heart sooner in San Diego than LA. And so after Dr. Hoagland was done with his 2-hour interview, if you've ever met somebody who asks questions when the speaker's halfway out the door, that sometimes is my bride. And she says, "Excuse me, Dr. Hoagland, would it be possible for Richard to get a woman's heart?" And he turned her back in the room and said, "Well, as a matter of fact, it is." And he said, "Hold on there, doctor. I just want to make sure that I just don't start having periods." And he looked at me and said, "Well, we can't guarantee anything. We'll sure do our best." I was grateful for that. Nevertheless, we were, I can't say coerced, but strongly encouraged to go back to Cedars as the only point of access for our transplant. And so we did. And after several visits, we went back there on October 12th, 2012 for a visit with their entire team. It's an all-day interview process. It's rather intriguing, but it's basically every facet of the healthcare delivery system that examines you to see if they like you or not. They really like you if you have a need and you have insurance. If you don't have insurance, they don't like you as much. We happen to have good insurance. But that said, we met with a psychiatrist, a nutritionist, a social worker, a financial advisor, a surgical transplant nurse, a transplant surgeon, a transplant cardiologist, and there are others on the team. And you meet independently with each, and any one of those on the team can tell you, no, you're not a candidate. The social worker, the nutritionist. Because if you're going to get a heart, they're so rare, they're such prized commodities, as it were, that if you're not going to take care of the heart, we don't want to give you the heart. When somebody else would put it together to greater use. And so we were very encouraged because they liked us, especially after they checked out our insurance. They said, "That's great stuff." And then they put us through more testing to determine where I stood. And where I stood was not good. So approved by the transplant committee and approved by Cedars-Sinai, we then subsequently had to apply to our insurance carrier, who first declined, and that's the process: file, deny, appeal, appeal, appeal. We were fortunate, unlike many, to be approved on our second filing. Many have to go through far more of an effort than we did. But that said, it was a joy to be approved, and it was almost like a relief for us because we knew that we were that much closer. And at the same time, we knew that my disease was progressing. Now, amyloidosis, unlike general cardiomyopathy, you have a descending trail of declining health. Amyloidosis, it's almost like falling off a cliff. You can feel it deteriorating, but all of a sudden, right before the end, it thunks. And I wasn't there yet, but I could feel the process wearing on me. There was another year before I had the thunk. But that said, my insurance company first declined me for what they said was an investigational treatment for heart failure. I didn't have heart failure, I had amyloidosis. And my heart was going to fail if we didn't treat the disease. But that said, we did further testing, and it's so interesting. When they give you the testing, you have to have a bad heart in order to go through the testing. But your heart has to be good enough to live through the testing. And the testing isn't always easy. And it's almost like a dilemma. Do we not? But I went through it because A, I was already at 100% on my insurance, and B, it got me the privilege of spending more time with my bride. I will tell you that our drives, just being together, were glorious. More time with my angel. And I treasured those times, and I treasured the staff. When we were at Cedars, they became family, and they treat you like you're their family. Isn't that what everybody wants for their health care? So I was put on the transplant list in November of 2012. And we went through regular monthly visits, more and more frequently as it narrowed down. I had an interesting conversation. Most every visit I went, Sherry's attitude during our visits was quite different from mine. I'd like to banter, and Sherry didn't. I'd come in with a smile and joy in my heart because I had the privilege to talk to new people, and Sherry never liked that. I'd play games. It was sort of silly, but they'd always check your height and your weight and whatnot. And I would be anywhere from 6'1.5" to 6'2.5", depending upon how tall the nurse was and what she could see. Just little simple things like that. If she was smaller, then I knew I could stand my tiptoes a little bit, just a little bit, get that extra inch. And but we had a lot of fun talking, and Sherry would always tell me, get to the point, just give them a straight answer, would you? And I couldn't, because I'm not wired that way. I need more information. But that said, there was a conversation I had with my head transplant cardiologist named Dr. Patel. And when he was done sharing all of his words, he was exhausted. And he was walking out the door, and I said, excuse me, Dr. Patel, but you've told me that when the time is right, I will get a new heart. But we all know that the heart is really a used heart. It would be new to me, but really it's a used heart. Now, you would think, in light of it being a used heart, that there may be some sort of price concessions, like when you're getting a new car. Dr. Patel looked at me and said, there's no such thing as discounts in transplantation. And you think, this is expensive. Wait till you see the cost if they had to fly the heart in. And they flew my heart in. And I will tell you that it's expensive. I just looked the other day, the website was down today for me to confirm it, but when I looked the other day, I counted over $6 million of charges that were declined. Now, they paid out an awful lot, and some of those charges were reprocessed and approved, but the total charges that I had were well over $6 million. And you can understand with that why they have to transplant carefully, because it comes at a great cost to all premium payers. And I was blessed to be able to benefit this year from all those whose premiums subsidized my care, with a heart that was flown in. Even today, whenever we're at Cedars, we look for that helicopter, because we knew that's what brought my life in. And we just have a lot of joy knowing somebody else is being blessed by them. Going back a little bit, or forward, excuse me, just a little bit, after Dr. Patel's visit in August, I was approaching my 1-year anniversary from being put on the universal donor list. We call that UNOS. And I was told initially that I'd have a 1-year wait for transplantation. So I was just prior to my 1-year wait. It's October of 2013. And so I called up my transplant coordinator, and I asked her, Jenna, how much longer do I have? I've done my year, and I'm about ready. And she said, you're doing so great that you probably have another year. I was aghast. And so I had literally told Sherry right after that, I said, Sherry, my health is deteriorating so rapidly now that I won't even make the first of the year, I can tell. And so what I decided to do, I said, if they're not going to allow me in to get the transplant, I'm going to go out my way. So I went to Baskin-Robbins, and 7 times out of 10 days, I had these 1,800-calorie milkshake with 7 scoops of ice cream. And it was mint chocolate chip and chocolate fudge blended together, and they were awesome. The only problem with it is I gained 10 pounds, and I couldn't get rid of it. And so I got very, very bloated. Felt great going down, but not lasting on me. And so I called Jenna back, and I said, Jenna, you have to understand, I can't even walk up the incline in your parking lot. And she said, okay, we got to get you in. So she brought me in for an outpatient test. It's called a right heart catheterization, and they put wires in your neck and they measure the heart and lung output. And mine on Veterans Day of 2013 was not good, so they said, it is not good, so therefore we're going to keep you. And they put me in in isolation in a standard room. And so I was a little bit confused by that. The numbers were bad, but I wasn't there to get the heart. That was key, but it wasn't my primary reason. As soon as they put me in isolation, right after my right heart catheterization, I prayed. I said, Lord, I know you brought me here for a reason, and that reason is to tell others about you, to share about you. But I'm in isolation, Lord, and they won't let me out of this room. So I just pray, Lord, since you won't let me go anywhere, that you bring the people to me. And the Lord started bringing people to me. Dozens and dozens and dozens of people. I was overwhelmed, just overjoyed. The people came with hearts that the Lord had prepared so I could open up their hearts to talk to them about them and where they were in life. And I asked basic questions. So, are you married? You have children? What do you do in your spare time? And every time I invested myself into their lives, everyone opened their window. Now answer me this. If you talk to a nurse or a nurse comes in to see you, how long does the nurse stay there before she's gone to another room? Maybe a couple minutes, maybe 3, 4, 5 if you're lucky. I had nurses and technicians, a couple of doctors, a hospital administrator on the Board of Governors, and others come into my room, volunteers as well, and they were appointed to be there. It was the most amazing thing. All I could do was lie on my back and pray. But when people came in, I had prayed for those people that were coming in. And they came with open hearts, wanting to share. Because here's somebody who can't do anything for himself, taking an interest in me. And they all opened up their hearts. And some of the stories were amazing. I can't recount all of them here. But they're just amazing. One gal whose life was really off-center was living with her boyfriend for 3 years, and I asked her, so tell me about your boyfriend. What is it you like about him? She said, well, we're going to get married in a civil ceremony in a couple of months. He said, but what do you enjoy about it? Well, he likes to read books. I said, so do you think that's a good enough foundation on which to build your marriage? A lifelong, lasting relationship? And she said, oh, I don't know. I said, well, what else is it you like to do? She says, well, we like to go to movies together. So let me repeat what you just said. You're going to marry this guy for the rest of your life because he likes to read books and because you like to go to movies together. She says, yeah, I guess that's it. So I asked her, do you think that's a solid enough foundation to build your life on? A relationship that's going to last, or is it going to be like every other relationship in Los Angeles? That's on a dubious foundation. Do you think there's another way, another option? And that would lead me to the opportunity to share Christ or lead her to Christ somehow, somewhere. I had another gal who was living with her boyfriend for 12 years. And I asked her about her boyfriend, what were the problems that she was experiencing, and they were numerous. But I asked her, well, when's the last time you went to church? She said, well, 12 years ago. Isn't that interesting? I said, well, where do you go to church? She said, well, I'm Catholic. I said, wow. When you tell me you're Catholic, she's basically telling me that I might go on Christmas and Easter only, but that you don't have an active relationship. I asked, do you go to a church? I'm Catholic. And so I opened up her heart there. I said, tell me, what is it about your Catholic church that you really like? And she said, the music. I said, why don't you do yourself a great favor and go to your Catholic church and listen to the music, which I know is beautiful. But while you're there, get out that little black book, your Catholic Bible, and start reading it. Because inside your Catholic Bible is a story about a God who loves you so very, very much and has a great plan for your life. And she said, I'm going to do that. I talked to others who received my encouragement in the same way. One gal was a Christian singer. I mean, you would know her voice if you could pick her out from the LA Philharmonic when they did the Hallelujah Chorus or the Hymn of Messiah in 1987 at the Hollywood Bowl. She was one of the chosen singers. And she sings in her own concerts. Singing jazz, primarily in Natalie Cole and whatnot. But she came down our hall and sang a hymn in the room next to us. And it was so beautiful. Sherry and I were in tears. And so I asked Sherry, please bring her in, and she sang a hymn to us. And it was so beautiful. And when we were done listening to her, I asked her, so tell me about yourself. And she opened up her heart like a book. And as she opened it up, I gave her words of encouragement straight out of Scripture. And she said, you know, I came here to minister to you, but you ministered to me. And so she sang a couple more hymns, and she left, and she came back, and she left, and she came back. And she said, I want you to know, I've never sung more than one hymn for any patient in any room at any time. Here I've come to you 3 times, and I've sung almost 9 songs, including a private concert with Natalie Cole, my bride Rose. We had a Jewish gal I spoke to whose wife had beaten her, who had been in jail. She's been divorced, and she's raising 2 kids in their teen years in a very difficult era for her, and she's working as a single mom. And so I asked her about her past, and as she told me, I reminded her, do you have any understanding how blessed you are as a people? Do you realize, because she told me she's not practicing, do you realize the relationship that you're sacrificing by not seeking the God of your people every day? Do you realize how much your God loves you and the things that he's allowed you as a people to do throughout the course of history? I can't imagine why one person that's Jewish would ignore their God and live their life in their own strength and experience their failings without him to support you. And I quoted a number of scriptures, and she said, wow, you know my scriptures better than I do. I says, no, I don't. I just know a few. But I know enough to point you back to the God of your creation, God of your people. I spoke to a guy who's in the Board of Governors, and it was probably one of the more unusual events. He was 85 and just retired, and I asked him, where's your office? And he says, I got them all over the place. So, like where? Los Angeles, Miami, San Francisco, Washington, New York, whatnot. I says, do you realize how blessed you are as God's chosen people? He says, never stopped to think about that. I says, well, you really are. Do you realize how much of the financial economy globally that God has allowed the Jews to control? He says, never thought about that. So I then went to a number of scriptures. One I went through the Old System of Atonement. Do you understand what God told you in his scriptures, what you need to do to be obedient to him, and how you can have access to God? And so I went through the Old System of Atonement, and I talked to him about the new covenant of grace through Jesus Christ. But in the process of doing it, instead of taking him to the New Testament first, I brought him to Isaiah, and I quoted to him Isaiah 9:6. Everybody should know it. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall rest on his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So I asked him point blank. I never mentioned the name Jesus to him, but I asked him, who is this person? And he wouldn't answer. So then I took him to Micah 5:2, which talks about the birthplace of the Messiah, and I said, who is this person? And he wouldn't answer. So I took him to Hebrews 11 and 12, and I talked about the great hall of faith, but Hebrews 12:1 talks about the great cloud of witnesses, and I asked him, who were these Jewish witnesses, and who were they a witness for? And he wouldn't answer. When we were done talking, he got up and looked at me and said, but he was only a rabbi. Only a rabbi. So I said, Stuart, do yourself a favor. You're going on a cruise. Every day that you're on the cruise, pray that God would reveal himself to you more and more, because God rewards those who diligently seek him. He said, I promise I'll do that. And when he was on the cruise, he met another Christian who gave him the book called Killing Jesus by Stephen Mansfield, not Bill O'Reilly. most research book I've ever read, personally, about the crucifixion and the time leading up to it. And when I read it, I wept. But that helped Stuart's understanding. And he's having a deeper faith in the God who is his Messiah right now. These are the opportunities that God gave me. But you have to understand, this conversation was ordained by God. How do I know? I had only met Stuart for a couple of minutes. He came as a visitor. He's on the board of governors, but he's also a visitor, a volunteer. And they wear white jackets. And he came into my room once, and we didn't talk about anything other than nice to meet you. A week later, he came back into my room, and I'm sitting in the chair with my artificial heart beating and taking a nap, and he waits for me in the chair opposite me to wake up. I wake up and said, Stuart, that's my call. Okay. Stuart, what brings you here today? He said, I had to come see you today. This is every time I come to the hospital, I come to do business or to see people, but I had to come see you today. And I knew that was a God-ordained appointment. And so I ministered, as it were, sitting in my chair or lying on my bed. This was not about me. Probably the more interesting story, as my heart disease progressed, I was told repeatedly in early December and before that I was going to need an artificial heart, but I kept objecting to that, deferring them to a later date, because I believed that God had called me to get a human heart, a donor match. And I kept pushing them off, and then God actually intervened and put them off a couple of weeks. But on December 17th, they came into my room and said, Mr. Hawkins, you've got minutes to hours to live. You will not survive this day unless you go for the total artificial heart map. So I acquiesced, went for the TAH, as they call it. And the surgeon's report reads that as he opened up my chest to take out my muscle, that my heart had become gelatinous fiber, and he picked it up and it disintegrated in his hand. And I'm amazed at that, because my God was still sending messages from my brain through my heart to keep me alive when my heart was jello. My God can do anything. My God is a great God. He can do anything. So with that said, I'm here. But interestingly, had I gone for the TAH earlier, as they had pushed me, that would have impeded or interrupted or interfered with God's schedule. You are allowed to receive a donor heart 30 days, no more than 30 days, from the date that you receive your total artificial heart. Because you're so far into the healing process, you cannot go beyond the 30 days until you're at least 3 months out. But people are walking around now with these battery-operated machines, living normal lives, if you can call it that, as much as a year out or more. On January 14th, I had told my transplant surgeon and another cardiologist that I'm not going to give my heart because we're so close. We're being trained on the TAH and going to be dismissed or discharged from the hospital 2 days from then. And at the 12th hour, on the 30th day, I get a call from my transplant coordinator who said, Mr. Hawkins, we have a heart for you. And I just bawled like a baby. And I've cried more in my life throughout this process, just tears of joy. And I ended up getting the heart. And interestingly, I've told you, we prayed over and over for the perfect heart at the perfect time from the perfect donor. And I went for my 10-month checkup just a couple of weeks back. And the echocardiogram report, the gal said to me, your heart is placed perfectly. If I didn't know you're a transplant patient, it would be difficult to tell. And I just cried. That's my God, who does amazing things in amazing ways. But none of this would happen had we not started our relationship in prayer, had we not built our daily foundation on our God, had we not relied on Him. This whole time I didn't worry. I had not 1 second of anxiety. That was my bride's responsibility. Good moms, Good husbands, good wives worry about their husbands and sons and daughters. And she carried the weight. And she was physically worn out. You could see it in her face because she cared so much. She was always wondering, will he make it, will he not? Another test, I had more tests than you could, they made up some tests. And I think some of the people that did the test weren't even licensed. They just brought them in off the street. Here's something to do. But with that said, this was the most amazing process I've ever had. A perfect heart at the perfect time from the perfect donor. And it's a perfect match even to this day. Used to take a lot of pills as transplant patients, regardless of the organ. Everything for me is going so well that I'm down to 3 pills, and that's it. As of January, I'll be down to 2 pills. I got 2 anti-rejections twice a day, and 1 antibacterial that I don't need starting next month. The stories are amazing, but the story has not ended. I don't know where this is going to take me, but I've seen it has legs. Wherever it takes me, whether it's just to share with my bride or whatever, my joy is sharing about my heart, my God who loves me so much. In that regard, I want to tell you, I felt your prayers. I got your card with your names on it. It made me weep. Your prayers mean more than I can ever say. I mean, I'm just so blessed. And to think that many of you prayed for me and for us is truly overwhelming. But I want you to know there is a real God who hears your prayers and answers them. I was there with sepsis, with pneumonia, with cellulitis, and a bad heart. And somehow or another I went through all of this. I was told twice they didn't think I was going to survive. I had already passed twice. And yet I'm here to tell you, there's a great God who loves you very much and has a great plan for your life. I'm so privileged to be able to come here and tell you about my God, my story. Thank you so much. Bless you all.
Rick, I